Hello, everybody. Welcome to Zone Talk, episode 3. Today, we're here with Sigrun Sigurjons, couples counselor and sex therapist. Can you tell us more about yourself?
I have been working with couples now for 5 years. It was something that was important to me, and I wanted to do early. But in Iceland, where I'm from and grew up, I didn't have the opportunity to pursue that sort of route of career.
Mm-hmm. So, what led you to do what you do?
I think it was sort of a mix of circumstances. I grew up in a family of 6 and sort of a middle child. So there were probably instances in my youth when I needed to sort of maintain the peace in my household. Also personality traits. I'm kind of, I guess, a calm and patient person. Makes me a good listener. So I think it was sort of just a mix of a few things.
Okay, so can you tell us more about your business?
My business is called Couples Solutions. I'm located on Steeles, not far from 404 and Steeles. And I have run my own practice there, see couples and individuals, and do sex therapy there as well.
Okay, so I know we're all under the lockdown. Can you tell us a little bit more about the challenges when it comes to work and personal life?
Yeah, I think it is really hard to run any business right now. The challenges that I face specifically is I find it really hard, especially with new clients that I haven't formed that sort of therapeutic alliance with, to sort of do that over the computer. It works better for clients that I've seen in person and we sort of already have that relationship. But I find it challenging to work, especially with new clients when we're talking about very sensitive subjects. People are more reluctant to do that over the computer.
Okay, and
Personally, I'm sort of bored, so it's nice for me to be able to work at least a little bit. The work itself is kind of, for me, intrinsically motivating. It's like I have a session maybe in the morning, and that makes me think of things that I want to research further and learn more about for my next session. So I think the work itself is kind of self-motivating for me, but it is hard. I experience challenges with it as well.
and how do you motivate yourself during under these circumstances?
What I miss the most is just being able to be physically active and being able to go to the gym. So what I try to do is I try to do daily walks, and when it's sort of nice enough, I try to do a little run. Like so many people, I've just downloaded one of those apps, and that's helpful. I just find that getting that physical exercise really sort of sets my mind in a space where I can focus better.
So to have a routine and doing so it's that way to motivate yourself a little bit more.
Yeah, I would say I have a routine, but like I have cheat days too.
And so I know that everybody is stuck at home. Arguments pursue when it comes to couple. Can you tell us a little bit more? Is there any coping methods and how to solve when arguments arise?
Yeah, it is true that a lot of people are experiencing, a lot of tension these days because they're having to spend much more time with their partner, and that is causing sort of stress and tension. Some of the couples that I've been working with, I have taught them to have sort of a code word, so that if either one of you recognizes that you have now come to a place where you are activated, your voice is raising, and you know that what will ensue is might just be an argument, and one let the one of you use the code word, and that kind of means everybody on a timeout to separate and go to each other's spaces and just calm down until you're better able to discuss whatever it was that got you upset in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And so, like, is it when you're doing your work, is it harder to talk about sex, or is it harder to talk about money?
I would say in my line, it's definitely harder for people to talk about sex. A lot of people are not used to talking about sex. It seems like in the Western world, we're raised with sort of understanding that sex is something that should happen naturally and everybody should be good at it immediately. And that's just not the fact. It requires exercise and knowledge.
And so can you tell us a little bit more about what does a sex therapist do?
Yeah, just like regular physicians, we have a statistical manual called the DSM-5, and that lists sort of groups of what we call sexual dysfunctions, which are all kinds of issues people face in terms of sexuality. It can be lack of knowledge or desire disorders, some inability with sex. It's just sort of endless.
So does it have to be medical or is it psychological?
Usually it is both. In the world, sexual issues are labeled with a lot of shame, and that's why people have such difficulties talking about it. So overall, there usually is both a physical and or a psychological component. But there are times when it's simply physiological, like somebody who's been taking a lot of antidepressants, for example. And there are times when it's also just psychological. For example, if somebody's had sexual abuse history or something like that.
And so why is this the subject of sex is kind of taboo in the Western world, like in your studies and work?
I don't think it's just in the Western world. I think it's everywhere. And I'm not entirely sure why. I think a part of it is, and this may sound sort of controversial, but like a part of it is that we assume that, we need to have a certain age and maturity to be able to be sexual. But all research shows that even children have sex drives. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that we should be using or exposing that to our children. But it's just one of those things that we associate with adulthood, and I think that's a part of what causes it to be shameful. There's also the sort of the association that it's something that should happen between adult. It's intimate, it's secret, and so all of those reasons are part of the reason why it's so hard to talk about.
I see. And so can you tell us more about the difference between a couples counselor and a sex therapist?
Yeah, so I think most couples counselors don't actually do sex therapy. And I sort of didn't grow up dreaming about being a sex therapist, believe it or not. It was sort of an area that I entered into when I started working with couples. I found that oftentimes when a couple is sort of out of balance, they're not very well connected, and maybe even they feel sometimes like their partner doesn't understand them. Oftentimes, sex is out of balance as well. It can be one party that wants to have more sex and the other one doesn't. And so I just found that it was really important to be able to talk to people about sexuality. And so I just found it to be sort of an enrichment to my practice. But going to couples therapy doesn't necessarily mean that you need to talk about sex.
So that when you go to a couples therapist, the problem might not be sex, the problem might not be something else. Not
I have I have never met a couple who went to couple therapy that didn't need to improve their communication. So I think that's always number one. If you have good communication, you can talk about sex, you can talk about finances, you can
Mhm.
talk about anything. But we're not taught good communication skills in school.
Yes, that's understandable because like um, when it comes to relationship, sometimes it's a little bit hard to talk about certain subjects. I know, and we live in Canada, and we come from multiple cultures. And does culture come to play when it comes to relationship and sex?
Yes, Absolutely. Different cultures have different viewpoints towards sex intimacy, and all of those things. Even to you know, women's stand in terms of equality. So I would say, you know, there is sometimes a big difference between somebody who grew up maybe in India or Asia, or somebody who grew up in Scandinavia. They have tend to be more liberal sort of values towards sexuality. So absolutely, that culture plays a big factor.
And so, with all this, what else factors? And you've been working for how many years now?
I've been working now for 5 years. It is something that I was always interested in doing, but I didn't get an opportunity to pursue sort of this field of career until about 10 years ago.
Oh, and so can you tell us some of your biggest success?
I think some of my biggest success have just been sort of in attitudes of clients. I can take, for an example, a client of mine that had been married for several years, a female client, and had not been able to complete a regular intercourse. And once we were able to kind of decipher that it wasn't a problem of pain, it was anxiety, fear of pain, basically. She was able to continue and have a regular sex life with her husband, and that was really meaningful for her.
Okay. And what's the biggest failure, you might ask?
I don't know if I would call it biggest failure. It was just kind of maybe the saddest, one of the saddest cases that I've experienced. And that was a man who came to me because he had been in sauna with his friends and kind of dropped his towel. And his friends started making fun of him for not being of adequate size down there. And this had such an impact on him that he experienced serious difficulties psychologically with just you know, approaching women and having intercourse after that for a long time. So it became a real struggle, and it's a good example of how sort of mental reasons can become a psychological problem.
So, so is there um, like biggest question everything that size matter?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually have a video on that on YouTube, so definitely Google that one. It is, I think, a profound question, and maybe there are individual differences. Personally, I don't think so, for very technical reasons. So yeah, check it out.
Okay, definitely. We'll put a link underneath. And so, can you tell us what are the top three advice you can give as a couples therapist?
I think, you know, the communication is absolutely number one. If you think about your relationship like a house or a car, you know, those kinds of things need maintenance over time. Don't wait until it's too late to go to a therapist, or when you're on your way to get a divorce. That's when therapy is going to be really difficult. It's going to be more costly. So I think number one, maintain your communications, and sort of the things to look out for are, you know, if you feel like you're disconnected, if you feel like your partner doesn't understand you, if you feel like you're just fighting and you're not getting anywhere, you're not able to discuss things, then it is time to get some help with that.
Okay. And what are the top three advice you can give as a sex therapist?
As a sex therapist, I think number one, if you have a good sex life, don't give it up. Sex is a use it or lose it kind of a techniques. Um, if you can at all, never lose physical touch from your relationship. Do the kissing, the hugging, the holding hands, all of those things. If anything comes up, that is your bridge to much closer intimacy. So never ever lose that. And the third thing is, when an issue comes up with your sex life, look for help. Look for help early. Don't let it go for many, many years, because again, then it becomes a much harder problem to work with, but it can still be worked through.
So, with the social distancing, how can couples, say, boyfriend and girlfriend, try to stay in touch? And now, violate the rules of social distancing.
Yeah, actually, believe it or not, there is a guideline for that too that's been put out. And it just talks about staying in touch using things like, confidential, like video sessions. You can have phone sex, you can do sexting, you can do mutual masturbation over video. There are a lot of options that you can still stay in touch even though you can't meet up.
Okay. And then I think the last question I have for you is that what's your Netflix recommendation for everybody?
Yeah, well, my recent one for anybody who likes sort of darker dramas like Ozark Family is Bloodline. That's my latest Netflix recommendation.
Okay. All right. Thank you having give us time to talk to you, and looking forward in future. And if anybody wants to reach out, how do they can find you online and offline?
Online is probably best. My company, Couple Solutions, that's my website. I'm easy to find there. You can contact me by phone or by email.
Okay, I will put a link underneath. All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.